G'day legends, I hope that you're doing well, and today we're going to start with a look over the map and then talk about some claims of offensives and some other things that have been going on. But as always, let's have a look at the map first off. And if you look here, we actually have three maps open today. So we have the deep state map, and we're centered around Bakhmut, sort of Soledar region. We're going to be looking at the live UA map as well, which is the most commonly used map, and also the ISW interactive map. But the last one we're going to be looking at is as well this one, and this is the map of more the pro-Russian side by Rybar. You can find these on Telegram as well. It's released every day, and this one, although is a day old because I'm in Australia, the times haven't caught up. Either way, we're going to be going over the three sort of pro-Ukrainian maps and then also the pro-Russian map. So the main thing to take note of today was the press service of Wagner Group have said that they've captured the village of Mykolaiivka, which is north of Soledar. And let's see, firstly, where this village is. So for a bit of situational awareness of where we are, we have Zaporizhia, Kiev, and so we're down in Donetsk oblast, Bakhmut's here, and then the Mykolaiivka village is up here, the north, so north of Soledar further. And there has been photographs of the Wagner Group also within this region. So it looks like the map has caught up to this small village of where it is. Now, why is this village important? Well, people are saying that it can threaten the supply to Seversk. So let's see how that is actually sitting. So Seversk is in here, and this Mykolaiivka sits here, and the supply routes, well, this was a big deal in the beginning too, because before Soledar had fallen to the Russians, there was supply routes through and up into Seversk. So yes, the front line has changed a lot, but the further north they push on this axis from here could potentially cut off a lot of ground in here. And let's see how this has looked over the past couple of days in this region. So the 2nd, 31st, sorry, we missed the first there, 31st, 30th. So you can see this map has updated fairly quickly on that region. And let's see if this map here, Live UA, I find Live UA is a lot slower to update than a lot of the other maps. Yes, this map is not showing that Mykolaiivka is under Russian control. The ISW map, this one is a little bit more difficult to use again. I apologize. And this is showing, I believe that region is under claimed Russian control. Yes, under claimed Russian control by the key of the map here, but not confirmed under Russian control. And on the Russian map, this is not as interactive as some other maps, but we want to go down to, and you're probably sick of me talking about it, but we want to go down to Bakhmut. This is the region that we're seeing the most heavy fighting. Russia has been fighting for this city for months and months, and since, the fall of Soledar, there has been a lot of success, I'll say, by the Russian forces in here. So what we're really seeing on this map today, so let's see over the past couple of days, the Russian advances. So we'll go back to the 31st, the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd. So what we're seeing here is Russia has pushed on these blocks here more, these housing blocks, over the past last few days, and as well on the south of the city has been pushing more through these blocks. And this absolutely is door-to-door fighting, like urban warfare. And the problem in here is, from my research, is the only bridge still standing here for the eastern side is this bridge. Although if we were to do a map measurement from where the claimed Russian ground is 200 meters. So that's under fire control of a rifle. There are these other bridges here. This bridge is shown maybe as gone on this map. That's the only location across without makeshift bridges. I can't confirm that, but that bridge is absolutely unusable. And what we may see a lot of people saying is Ukraine will step back from this eastern side of this river, will step back and defend in here. As Ukrainians' positions before this were in here amongst these like small lakes, streams. This is where the Ukrainian positions were. So those positions have fallen over the past, say, week. And, in here, those positions have been overrun. And and now in this urban warfare, we may see them fall back to more reasonable positions. What does the other maps show? So on the live UA map, which I will say this is the most commonly used map, and I'm not saying to believe any of these maps because each one has its own set of information coming to it, and each one absolutely has its own agenda as well. But as we see, the live UA map is not showing anywhere near the same advancement. So if we take this large water source here as sort of a reference point, that is here. So we're saying that Russia is in here on one map and not on the other. And we're also saying in here where there's meant to be these Ukrainian defensive positions on this map, we're saying that is completely under Russian control. And this is why I bring this up about, you need to really be looking at a few different sources to get your information, because it's not easy to get. So ISW, which is a very much harder map to use, ISW sort of is in between. So let's use this water source as a key point reference, and up here where these defensive positions were, so live UA map, these defensive positions, and this water source is the key, and deep state map. So in my opinion, I actually think the deep state is more on the money with some of this, but absolutely, unless you're in some intelligence service with a satellite, you don't know. But interestingly, let's go to the Russian map. So the Russian map is more, I guess, in line with the deep state. So, this isn't a great map, but look at this water source, look at where the claimed Russian positions are. That aligns a lot with the deep state Western map, although on this outer edge, the Russian map is saying that they are a lot further in. So this is why I bring this up, is we don't really know. But if you like me going over these maps, we can continue doing that. But something else that I want to say is reportedly there's thousands of civilians still within Bakhmut, including children. And you can see this on Vice's new video with families remaining in the city. And this raises the question of why these families are not leaving, or leaving it to the absolute last minute. Well, this is a situation that has been evolving slowly, but they're very quickly in other things. So there's a lot of Westerners out there conducting evacuations off, the hot line of fire. And we've seen that in some footage. But the evac's there, but the transports from then locations back are not really existed. So a lot of people want to be working on that front line, pulling people off buildings and there's artillery and whatever. I don't know, that's a very dangerous thing to do. But there's a lot of people out there who, will bring you back to Kramatorsk, but then from there they've got to find their own way. And you have to remember that it might be easy for you or I to sit here and go, I would just pull out. The people in these areas could be very poor. They'll have their house there, their apartment. It is a very hard situation. But it was, that transport, and then we might even be able to take you to Kiev, but then the transport from Kiev to Poland, Romania is very difficult, and money is a big problem with this. But I also think with, the West sending over $100 billion of money, there needs to be at least some level of allocation to pulling people out of these areas. These people should be out of these areas, and that situation is on the front line. That is evolving very quickly. And I believe one problem in this could be from some more propaganda of saying this situation here, it's under control. Yeah, there's a bit of fire to and from, but we will eventually be successful in somewhere like Bakhmut. Now, I'm not saying that Ukraine cannot hold a counteroffensive and take that, but if you want to say that that situation there is under control, it's absolutely not. And those people should have been told months ago, you need to leave. But people still, were operating when I was there, were still operating shops, still working, and wouldn't leave. But there's also a less talked about reason in a lot of these regions is that there are people who are pro-Russian, especially in the older generation in these regions. There are people who don't want to leave because they lived under the Soviet Union and don't mind where they live. And if you live in one of these villages, how much will your life really change under a different government? Well, that's up for you to make up your mind, but it's one of those things that is definitely exists. And a lot of these very pro-Russian people have been a massive headache for the Ukrainian forces due to everything from calling in positions of things and acting against the Ukrainian forces. We were told to be very careful when we are working in frontline areas, be very careful of civilians who will call in positions, or even to the degree of taking pot shots out their window with a gun at you. Okay, so all over the media recently is, will we see a major offensive? Well, Ukrainian officials and the ISW, which is the Institute of War, say that there will be a major upcoming offensive from the Russians. Ukraine's Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov said that Moscow had mobilized some 500,000 troops for a potential offensive, although this number has not been verified. Although we do know that Putin did announce the mobilization of 300,000 conscripts. But Reznikov said officially they announced 300,000, but when we see the troops at the borders, according to our assessment, it is much more. This brings in that figure of 500,000. Ukraine has said that Russia intends to capture the Donbass region by March, but if these offensives go ahead in February, March, this will still mean that it's going to be months before this Western equipment, mainly the tanks people will talk about, will arrive, although there's a lot more equipment within that. Putin has said in his speech on the 80th anniversary of the Soviet victory in the Battle of Stalingrad, quote, "It's incredible, but it's a fact. We're again being threatened by German Leopard tanks with crosses on them," referring to the Iron Cross, not a swastika as some reporting will be. German vehicles still have iron crosses on them. When I worked with the Germans in Afghanistan, still had iron crosses on the vehicles. This is not a reference to Nazism, but a reference to the German forces. Putin continued, "Nazism in the modern form of manifestation again directly threatens Russia's security. We do not send our tanks to their borders, but we have the means to respond, and it won't end with the use of armoured vehicles. Everyone must understand that." Now, people are saying that this was, again, a level of somewhat nuclear threat, saying it won't end with our armour, it'll end with a bomb. Now, Putin did not say that, but many people are saying, and I agree with, that's what he was more referring to. And as well, something I found interesting was in Volgograd, a new bust of Stalin was erected on Wednesday. Now, Joseph Stalin has estimated that his regime killed upwards of 20 million people. Also, we've seen a build-up of Russian forces in Belarus, including fighter jets, and there's videos of trains full of tanks as well, apparently conducting an exercise, which we could say that we've seen a similar, excuse of, exercise before the invasion. All the build-up on Ukraine's eastern border was, it's just an exercise, we're not going to invade, and then they did invade. But this goes into that tie of offensive. Remember that Kiev only sits under 100 kilometres from Belarus, and in between Kiev and Belarus sits Chernobyl. This is where we saw many Russian troops and ground-to-ground fighting between Russia and Ukraine within the boundary of the Chernobyl exclusion zone, as well as reports that Russian troops were irradiated and busloads of guys had left because they dug into the soil. But I can't confirm how that was. But quote, "The ISW continues to assess," that's the Institute of War, "that a Russian invasion from Belarus is exceedingly unlikely, and the ongoing formation operation to pin Ukrainian forces against the northern Ukraine-Belarus border seems to be faltering as Ukrainian officials increasingly assess that this contingency is improbable. The ISW continues to assess the threat of a cross-border raids from Belgorod, Bryansk and Kursk Oblast into the northern and northeastern Ukraine is likely to attempt to force Ukraine to deploy limited elements to these areas to protect against such attacks, thus dispersing Ukrainian troops to an extent in advance of likely Russian offensive operation in the coming months. The Institute of War has previously reported that similar Russian distraction and dispersion operations have been conducted in the Zaporizhia Oblast. And this is very similar to the Russians' February 24th initial attacks, which was an attempt to invade many locations. And some will say the reason they hit so many locations at once was to disperse the Ukrainian troops all over the country. And you could also argue that Russia's seemingly failed advance on Ukraine's capital, Kiev, was actually a feint that allowed Russia to make large advancements in the east quickly, as the troops from Ukrainian forces were moved to defend the capital. You can see that Russia did make large advancements in those first days. Although the counter to this argument is that the amount of Russian troops killed on that advance to Kiev, including the highly trained VDV paratroopers and the amount of armor ops, even if this was the purpose, it failed, and it was a failed attack on Ukraine's capital. A Russian missile on February 1st has hit a building in the Donetsk Oblast, Kramatorsk. This has now been confirmed that 4 people have been killed, and apparently people are still stuck under the rubble. Ukrainian officials say that it was a Russian Islander K missile. We've seen these missiles used a lot, but these missiles cost $3 million USD each, which does, of course, have a massive monetary effect on the Russian army. And not only that, but when it's hitting civilian buildings like this, it has a massive impact on how people see the Russian forces as well, having a bad effect in that and on the money, especially when the replacement of these missiles is reportedly not meeting how quickly Russia is using these missiles. So eventually they may run out. Although, the pro-Russian groups have said that these buildings were housing troops, and Ukraine has said, no, these were just civilians. There's been a lot of titles going around saying Pentagon says Ukraine can't retake Crimea. But what was actually said was to recapture Crimea from Russian troops in the near future. This doesn't mean that Ukraine can't take Crimea, as the title suggests. It just means that in the near future. But of course, the title of videos, and including my own stuff, the way the internet works is needs to be a bit clickbaity, as well as, titles with someone like this on the photograph, because, and I get a lot of criticism for that, of people in my emails, whatever. It's just how YouTube and the internet works. At the World Economic Forum at Davos last month, Zelensky's advisor, Andriy Yermak, has rejected the idea of a Ukrainian victory without capturing Crimea, saying this is absolutely unacceptable. But either way, Crimea is going to be an incredibly hard fight for the Ukrainians and the Russians. The lay of land is definitely in Russia's favour here, with Russia's navy still being at large very intact, and an attack here potentially could be devastating for Ukraine if it was a failed attack, because the amount of troops needed to take that area. And if we look at Crimea on the map, there's really only 2 routes in. And of course, you could argue that, well, connecting to Russia, there is only 1 route. But you need to remember that Russia has had the best part of 9 years to form a defence here. And, if Ukraine did get cut off here, Ukraine does not have a navy, and we know that paratrooping is pretty much out of the question to get a large amount of forces on the ground here, especially with the air defence systems here. With Russia's navy working Black Sea, and a lot of this ground reportedly being almost swampy through here, it will be one hell of a fight. Although, across here, in the Kerch Bridge, where we have seen, that bridge attacked with a truck bomb that was, on the pro-Ukraine side, it could also be very cut off. But we are unsure how this will go. But a more untalked about issue in Crimea is that Ukraine has claimed that Russia has relocated 1 million Russians to the part of annexed Crimea region. So in here, there is now 1 million Russians. And that they also say that the people they moved here were very pro-Russian. Meaning, if Ukraine were to take this peninsula, even the civilian populace would be incredibly difficult to deal with. And as well, this raises a lot of legal questions with the United Nations. Was if Ukraine was to, take this and then to deport these people who had been settled for 9 years, it raises a lot of questions. And it doesn't matter what you think ethically of that. It's a very difficult situation here. So I can't say whether or not this is a possibility, but that's just the news from today. So I hope you're looking after yourselves, keeping well. So thank you very much.